Thank you for joining the latest episode of the Special Fathers Network Dad's Zoom call. Tonight's topic is siblings and family balance, a super important topic, particularly for those that are raising more than one child. I'm pleased to report that we have a number of seasoned dads, Special Fathers Network Mentor Fathers with us this evening. And the format for tonight's show is that I'll ask each of the dads to make a brief self-introduction, which includes who they are, their family, what their connection to special needs is, and maybe a brief statement about where they live and what they do for work. And then once the self-introductions are done, what we'll do is we'll go through a series of questions. I prepared some questions that I'll ask each of the dads, and then if time allows, we'll allow some of the others that are on the call to ask questions as well. So the four dads that I've asked to speak tonight include Skip Gianopulos, who's a Special Fathers Network podcast dad number 3, Jerry Castro, a Special Fathers Network podcast dad number 66, John Kimec, Special Fathers Network dad number 79, and Al Feria, Special Fathers Network dad number 119. So, Skip, I don't think you're the oldest dad, but since you were there from close to the very beginning, why don't you go first with your self-introduction?
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you, David. Thanks for having me tonight. Yeah, David and I have gone way back. I've got 4 daughters. We live in kind of the Barrington area, Barrington Hills to be exact. And my wife and I, so our second and fourth daughters are 2 that have special needs. Our second daughter, Jessica, she just turned 18. So we've been kind of going through the whole guardianship and Social Security process with her. That's kind of a new era for us. She's a senior at Barrington High School, and she's most days she's our easiest kid. Our third daughter, Cassidy, also has Down syndrome. So Jessica and Cassidy both have Down syndrome. Cassidy, our youngest daughter, Cassidy, also is on the autism spectrum as well. So she's got a little more of a challenge ahead of her in terms of being independent, but again, just wonderful personality. And our other 2 girls, I've got a 20-year-old that's a sophomore in college, and then a 16-year-old at a junior at Barrington High School. And so those are our 2 typical kids. So
Great, thank you.
In terms of an introduction, what I do professionally, I'm a wealth manager with a firm called Kovitz Investment Group in the city of Chicago. So thank you, David.
Thanks for that introduction, Skip. Jerry, over to you.
I'm Jerry Castro. I live in Annapolis, Maryland. I have, including my son who passed away, Jack, I have 8 kids, range from the youngest 11 to the oldest 38 right now. 2 of them are married. We're expecting our first grandchild come up here in March. And I know David, we both work at UBS, and he was introduced to me by the manager there, describing the network that he established. And I got to say, it's an amazing thing when people come together just to help other people out. Because one of the lessons that I learned from my son Jack, I think it's amazing how somebody who never spoke a word, and he lived for, I'm big with numbers, so he lived for 5,812 days. That's 15 years, 10 months, 39 days. How much he taught me through silence. And one of the things that he just taught through silence was, being unconditional, listening to understand, and just observing that there's more behind somebody's mood, possibly more behind things, and to be more thoughtful and to think about things more thoroughly. So for David to start an organization like this, where you can I know when I was going through what my son was going through, a simple note gave me so much strength to get through anything. That to create a network like this, I think is amazing. So thank you, David, for having me be a part of it.
Jerry, glad you could be with us this evening. And John, your turn to make a self-introduction.
Evening, gentlemen. I'm John Kimec. My wife and I live in New Ulm, Minnesota. We just moved here back in May, which is New Ulm is about an hour and a half southwest of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. My wife and I have 6 children. Our oldest is 12, and our youngest was 6 weeks yesterday. It's a brand new arrival. It's our Michael, our third child, who is 8, who brought me into the network. It's been great to connect with and get to know David and be part of his work. Michael has Pierpont syndrome, which I guess is kind of like a cousin to autism, if you will. So he's 8 and functions probably like he's around 12 or 13 months, has feeding difficulties and so forth. And Jerry so beautifully stated, it's amazing what you can learn from a child who can't speak. I could go on and on, about that, but very blessed to be parenting, all of our children to be part of this, part of the network.
John, glad you could be with us. Over to you now.
Good evening. I'm Al Feria, married to Nicole for 23 and a half years. We have 4 living children. Joel is 19, Emma 17, Elizabeth 15, and John is 9. John has nonverbal autism. I guess this is the nonverbal evening for fathers. And he brings great joy to our family, even though he doesn't really speak. He communicates to all those around him. And we've been blessed by his presence in our family. I work for a nonprofit faith-based organization called One Collective, based in Elgin, Illinois. And I'm based in West Caldwell, New Jersey, 22 miles out of New York City. And I got in contact with Special Fathers Network last spring or whenever that conference was. And I've enjoyed connecting with David and others and other fathers since that time.
Al, thanks for joining us. So the first question I'd like to pose, and we'll just keep the same order that you made your self-introductions, but the first question I'd like to pose has to do with how do you make the time to spend one-on-one time with your typical child or children when we all know that the child that has the special needs usually requires more attention, more of your time, more of your wife's time for that matter. So the question is, how do you make that time? What are some of the things that you've been able to do to find that one-on-one time with your other child, your other children? Skip, back to you.
Thanks, David. Yeah, that is a great question. I would say we've done a lot of dividing and conquering. My wife and I have kind of, enabled, we've enabled each other to spend one-on-one time with our typical kids. Example of that actually coming up, we're going to try to spend a few weeks down in Florida, and my wife and a typical daughter that's still at home are going to go down a couple of weeks early and just get some time together. We'll all be back here in the Great White North with our 2 special kids. One of the things that kind of comes to mind as well is looking for those extended times away. Our church actually does a camp called Camp Paradise, and it's a dad-daughter, dad-son camp, and it's one-on-one. It's in the middle of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It's about 9 hours drive from Chicago, and it is. It would not have made the top 10 list of things that I would want to do in terms of spending, 5 days without running water or electricity, or it is definitely roughing it, but it's amazing what that kind of block of quality time can mean to your typical kids. I remember one story when we were driving up there. This would have been the 2nd or 3rd year that I've gone up with my oldest daughter, Stephanie. And we were, 9 hours in the car. You've got a lot of time to talk and, get to know each other. And so our family had just been to a very nice dude ranch out in Colorado a few weeks prior. And so we were just talking about vacations. And I said to Stephanie, I said, if you could go anywhere in the world on vacation, where would you want to go? And she looked at me like I was crazy. And she said, Dad, we're going there right now. And so, it just spoke to me in terms of how important that was for that one-on-one time with my daughter. And she would have been maybe 10 years old, 11, something like that at the time. And, just made some great memories up there. So actually I'd been up there 5 times with each of my typical kids. So been up there 10 times for that 5-day stretch. It's priceless memories.
Well, Skip, thanks for sharing. It brings to mind this vision that I had of spending some really good quality one-on-one time, that travel time. And what I found is that when my kids were younger, they would be playing video games or they would want to sleep. So one of the tricks that I learned when they got to be a little older, once they were 16 and they had their driver's licenses, was I would have them drive. So they couldn't fall asleep or play video games, and we could have those conversations. Yeah. So for what it's worth. Anyway.
A good friend of mine has said, those shoulder-to-shoulder conversations, the ones that you have in a car, you just never seem to have in an airplane. And so those road trips, some great memories there.
Yep. Thanks for sharing. Jerry, back to you.
Sure. At first, I found it kind of tough to find that balance. It was going back and forth to the hospital with our son Jack. So our oldest daughter Megan took control a lot with her younger sisters and brothers. We started, like Skip said, to divide and conquer, and we would just schedule one-on-one time. Kind of like made you go like on a date with your daughter or your son. With me, with my 3 daughters, what really helped me out a lot was that at the time our oldest daughter, when Jack was alive, was going to Manhattan College. So I'd go up and visit her when I was in New York, and that was great times, going to restaurants and so forth. Then our second oldest daughter, she went to Pepperdine University. So I always made it a point to travel. And when you get that alone time away from your own hometown and you're not going home, a lot of different conversations just came up, which really gave me the opportunity to really, it's kind of embarrassing to say, really get to know your own daughter extremely well. And then my other daughter went to the University of Alabama, and that was fun because she's more like me, loves football, the whole thing. And we really had a great time. So that really helped me out, and it made me realize the importance back home with my son, Jerry Jr., my son, Jet, and my other daughter, Carrie, that I had to schedule more time, but put my cell phone away and listen to be present, listen to understand. We started this thing about 8 years ago. I don't know if you've ever read the book, One Word by John Gordon. The book makes you come up with one word that represents what you want to be for a whole year. Okay. And it asks you to look up, look in, and look out. And then ask yourself, what do you need? What needs to go? And what's in your way? And you come up with one word. In the first year, my word was commitment. And it was a commitment to be present and a commitment to pay attention to the person in front of me, to understand what they're saying, not to interrupt them, with my children, obviously, and just really engage in the conversation and not have my cell phone around answering questions and like I wasn't there. It's amazing how much you absorb. And then the facial expressions, which you really capture. And we've done that ever since. The one word thing really helps us because it's really fun to pick, a word and what it represents. So you have to make it an effort, and life gets in the way at times, work, but it's definitely worth it if you're really focused and present in the moment.
Jerry, great suggestion. I'll make a note of that, included in the resource part of the YouTube, which is the book One Word by John Gordon. And before we go on, I'm sort of curious to know, since you've done it for 8 years, what are some of the other words that either you've embraced or a couple that come to mind that one of your kids would have embraced?
My word this year is journey. And I want to live in the journey. I've been reading all these different books, and instead of setting goals and so forth, goals are mile markers for me. And I want to be in the journey and enjoy every aspect of it, the challenges and the great things, because the challenges make the great things that much better. So that has been great. Another word in the past was core, because I caught myself focusing on the noise or being distracted by the noise and then ignoring the core issue. I'd be taken advantage of by listening to the noise as opposed to the core issue. So by having core, I always eliminated the noise and focused. Well, why are we having this conversation? What is the issue? And it allowed me to either say no, okay, and allowed me to really look at what the core issues were. One of my kids was pause, because they never stopped before they acted. You know, I always tell them the problem with wisdom, it comes after experience. So why don't you take a little time out before you act? So you don't have to learn the hard way, right? That was a hard one. So it's a fun exercise. You'll really enjoy it if you go through it.
John, back to you.
Well, similar to what everybody has said, activities seem to be a great way, to make those one-on-one connections, whether it's, different trips or different sports or whatever else. I had a chance to take my eldest boy camping on the North Shore for a few days last summer, and which was just incredible. We still talk about jumping at Lake Superior, which was all of, a balmy 50 degrees, or whatever else. And we have a daughter who was a budding gymnast, and so going back and forth to her practices and spending time at her meets and so forth are great ways to connect and get a window into what they're doing, what they're enjoying. I have a very unique opportunity. So I work in education. I'm a school superintendent, and my 3 of my children, neurotypical children, attend in the system. So I see them probably more than they want to be seen by their dad throughout the course of a school day, going to school, coming home, and so on and so forth. So I find the activities, the carved out times, the trips or things like that to be very, very helpful. But I know it's something that my wife and I have been talking about that we try to be more intentional about is it doesn't necessarily have to be a planned trip or an activity or so forth, but just I think someone said it, if we're in the home, who needs us right there, in the moment. So if the waters are calm and the 2-year-old comes up with a ball and wants to play ball for 10 or 15 minutes, even some of those really, really simple things we found to be some of the most priceless moments as well. And then along with that, as great as the one-on-one time is, just in reflecting on what you gentlemen were saying, at least for us, sometimes like 2-on-1 or even 3-on-1 isn't always the enemy of 1-on-1. As long as it's if the time is focused and intentionally sought, and then we live in the moment, it seems to really have a really lasting effect.
Some good pearls of wisdom there, John, emphasizing the point that you don't have to be doing things, out of town or, for days at a time, but to try to find those moments, right? That could be smaller segments of time, more on a day-to-day basis, as opposed to, once a week, once a quarter, that type of thing. So thanks for emphasizing that. Al, back to you.
My kids are all foodies. They grew up in Paris, France, so that's kind of figures. And so sometimes it's eating certain kinds of foods. There's this Asian restaurant that all my kids like, so sometimes we all go. Sometimes it's just 1 or 2 different kinds of foods. I took my daughter college hunting a couple of summers ago when we could do that. And Giordano's Pizza, but in your neck of the woods, is one of our favorites, Chicago style pizza. So we ordered from the road in Indiana, called ahead, so it was ready when you arrived. So just certain things like that. Also events. I do have to travel sometimes for my job, and bringing kids with and doing fun stuff along the way. And my oldest, he's 19, and he just turned 19. He kept wanting to go to a gun range. I'm not really into guns and all that, but we went last week and shot a couple different kinds of guns. He had a blast and he still talks about it. So that was a win. He'll probably never forget that. And just certain events like that our kids really want to do and we get to do, we'll probably stick with them as long as they live.
You raised another good point, Al, which is, you want to do things together, and instead of doing all the things that dad enjoys doing, try to be more child-centric. When taken to an extreme, I do have a daughter that wanted to go skydiving. Nobody else in the family would go with her, so I agreed to go with her, which was, I live to tell the story type of an experience. But I think you raised a good point. So the second question I'd like to pose to each of you has to do with, and I hope it's not stepping on any landmines, but I think it's to be real, which is, have you had to deal with these issues of jealousy and resentment? The jealousy and resentment that your typical child or children might have toward their sibling, whether the sibling's older or younger, because of all the time that you or mom are spending with that other child. So Skip, I want to start with you.
Yeah, thanks, David. I would say overall, our typically developing kids have been very understanding of kind of the different dynamic. But, there are definitely times where it is kind of flamed out. I'm, trying to think of an example where it almost feels like because we're making special accommodations for our special needs children, it's almost viewed as favoritism in a way. And that's, that's definitely a fine line to walk. It's interesting. My oldest daughter, Stephanie, is actually in the process of becoming an elementary education teacher with a minor in special ed. So it's going to be really interesting, some of the conversations that I'll be able to have with her in terms of kind of how she felt as a kid being brought up in a home with special needs kids. And now that she's kind of learning more about it professionally and will be kind of immersed in it fully, kind of what her reaction will be down the road. But yeah, it's definitely an issue, and it's a little bit of a balancing act. I'll say it that way.
Okay, Skip, thanks for sharing. Jerry, how about on your end? You have a much larger family. I'm wondering how you and your wife dealt with that.
I think because when Jack was born in 2001, Megan was older, Elise was a bit older, Marley and Elizabeth were probably 9, 10, 11 years old. And Jack had such a battle. So since we were in the hospital the first 6 months, and they saw and they witnessed how I'd be there at 5 a.m, go to work, then go straight to the hospital. My wife would be there. And my wife is an eternal optimist. I mean, kind of, if you don't like optimism, it's one of the people you're going to say, okay, she's out there. It's like anybody she meets, she says, oh, we love you. I go, honey, I don't even know them yet. I got to get to like first. She just over the top. So our kids have inherited that. And I think what Jack brought to all of us was an appreciation of, we have the ability to go out and live a life, walk, talk, fail, get in the game. And that kind of changed everything, because we had 2 children after Carrie and Jet. So they never knew a life without Jack. So they saw the difference right away. So there was a huge level of appreciation. The biggest lesson that I learned was when Jack did pass away, my son Jerry and I would start talking more. One day I'm at a stoplight. He's following me because it was just a terrible morning for him. And by accident, he rear ends me. Okay. So I get a little bit upset. We turn around, go back home, and he gets out of his Jeep, and he's crying. He's coming to me telling me how sorry he is. And then I asked him, Jerry, what's wrong? And then it all came out that he didn't like how I used Jack as a means to what I thought was motivating him. And it really opened my eyes to, it made me realize, why didn't I ever ask him more deeper questions? You know, because I think my issue more was that because so much attention is on this wonderful gift, right? And there's such an appreciation for him, that you're not asking the deeper questions of your other children to really get to know how they feel. And if you don't really get that out, I mean, I feel blessed to have gotten that out. I would never have known that. And it changed my whole way I communicated with him, and it got much better. I would never have known that. So it was a little bit different for us. It wasn't the jealousy because everybody saw and appreciated. It was more, I learned to ask deeper questions to get an understanding more of their feelings.
Jerry, thank you for sharing. So if I can paraphrase what you've said, you didn't deal with the issues of jealousy and resentment that might typically arise in a family just based on the family dynamics, but you were reflecting on the fact that you weren't going as deep as you could have or should have when your kids were a little bit younger, but you came to that realization, and it's really helped change your perspective.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. So John, back to you.
See, I don't know that I've seen really the jealousy per se, but perhaps some of the resentment, and very, you know, justifiably so. I would say. So our Michael started presenting his signs of his issue when he was a month old, and so the first month was fine, and then he ended up in the hospital. He was in the hospital for a better part of 3 or 4 months, and at the time our oldest was 3. And our daughter turned 2 while he was in the hospital. I still remember the cafeteria red velvet cake that we stuck 2 candles into for the birthday party that year. So I think similar to what some of their gentlemen have said, our other 3 children, it's all they've ever known. And David, I think these 2 questions are very, very closely related, because the resentment comes from the lack of presence we were able to have prior to. So yeah, I see it, and I think that some days it gets handled better than others. Some days everyone's cup is full and everything is humming, and people's, you know, the care is where it needs to be, and so on and so forth. But you know, there's, similar to probably all you gentlemen on the call, there's some things that we simply can't pick up and do, like, you know, go out to a restaurant or spend an inordinate amount of time at somebody's house, you know, and things along those lines. And I think just kind of as I sit here and talk through it, you know, we pray a lot for healing, and I know that much because it's something that's ongoing for, you know, for all of us. And I think we do a little bit better when we kind of just face the frustration head on and let people kind of talk it out, because you want to try and balance everything as much as you possibly can, but there are some frustrations, you know, that a child can't understand. You know, why can't we go doing this at so-and-so's house? There's some things that a dad can't understand. You know, why can't we, you know, this and that and the other? And I think when we talk about them and are honest about them, we can have some, you know, very honest and teachable moments, you know, with our kids to help them kind of navigate those frustrations, some of those things that they've seen that we wish they wouldn't have to be experiencing until later in life.
Thanks for sharing, John. And you raise a good point about being head on with the issues, as opposed to, you know, oh, that'll resolve itself, or we'll get to that, or you know, kick the can down the road type of mentality. So thanks again for sharing. Al, back to you.
All 3 of my older kids remember life pre-John, so they remember we used to travel a lot more, and so that's one thing we haven't been able to do as much. We've gone to for 4 years to a family camp by a group called Johnny and Friends, and they treat the typical siblings very well. The first time we went, we were amazed. We thought it was more for our younger son who has autism, but they had all sorts of activities for our typical kids too, and even a group for them. So I think that's where they started thinking initially about what's it like to be typical, and that there's other typical siblings in the world as well. They hadn't really met anyone before that. And so that's been helpful, just working through some of those things. My 19-year, I mean, all three of my older kids help with John as well in different ways every day. So they love him, they care for him, but they get frustrated sometimes about having to do that and not being able to do some other stuff that they could have done if John wasn't in our family. And so we've tried to show them the benefits of having John in our family, getting to do certain activities like Johnny and Friends Camp that we couldn't have done unless John was in our family, trying to show the positives that are with having a special needs sibling in addition to the challenges that are there.
Al, thanks for sharing. So I want to touch on the topic of therapy, and I'm wondering if you had any therapy yourself, or if any of your family members have had therapy, and then what the benefit or disadvantages of that has been for your own family. And if you haven't, it's just not an issue. So Skip, back to you.
We attempted. We had made an appointment. We'd gone to a therapist with our two typical kids, both Gail and I with them. So it was the four of us in the counselor's office, and it was kind of a one and done thing. We was not well received by our kids. It was kind of forced upon them, and so I would say we failed at that. We did, and I'm drawing a blank on the name of the organization. It might have been through the National Association of Down Syndrome, but there was a kind of a siblings camp, if you will, and it was all kids that had siblings that were kids with Down syndrome in this case, and that promoted some good conversation, and I think that was, our kids enjoyed that. And as I'm recalling, that was quite a few years ago. As I'm recalling, it was more around kind of dealing with the potential embarrassment that their special needs kids could possibly bring them with their friends and things like that. But yeah, it's tough being a sibling of somebody with special needs, and we've tried to recognize that. We've tried to give resources and sign them up for things with varying degrees of success.
Well, Skip, I want to just say thank you for your authenticity. Things don't always work out. We're not just talking about having kids with special needs either. This is just life.
Yeah.
You try things and some things work and some things don't. So again, thanks for your authenticity. Jerry, how about you?
No, we never did therapy. I think our lives were just very busy with our kids and all the different activities. Looking back on it, my wife and I probably should have done something for ourselves, because you don't recognize how fast time goes by, and when your entire focus is spread around your children, you tend to lose focus on each other. And I think as I look back on things, she was a very successful professional, and she gave it all up. I didn't have to give it up. So sometimes, look, I'm a guy, I can be a jerk, unfortunately. And I always appreciate what she's done. But if you may say something and not have that appreciation, I wish her and I would have gone through something to keep our bond together, because you're both stressed and you can think you're having the worst day, and it's easy to feel sorry for yourself that everything's going in the wrong direction, not recognizing she's also going through it as well. So I wish we would have done that, but fortunately we're stronger because of everything. But I wish we would have gone through it, her and I.
Jerry, thanks for sharing. Very insightful. John, how about you and your family?
Just the whole dynamic can create a tremendous strain on a marriage. So my wife and I went to counseling for a little while. And then I continued myself for a brief stint after that. And I'm not anti-counseling by any stretch, but it just, we reached kind of a plateau where it simply wasn't helping. So we discontinued and so forth. And again, not to, minimize, how it could be, effective at all. There was a book that we read that really helped us immensely in navigating these issues. I'm drawing a blank on the author. Love and Respect was the name of the book. And one of the easiest reads we've ever read. And we both agreed that if we were ever in charge of a marriage prep program, that would be the first, last, and only tool we probably ever used. It was just phenomenal. So we got a lot of mileage, out of that, and then just talking through together a lot of things that we're discussing here, right now. We found that to be, at least for us, more helpful than the therapy piece.
John, thanks for sharing. Love and Respect, the book. We'll put it in the resources part of the YouTube as well. Al, how about you?
Our family's gotten counseling, therapy, whatever, over the years. We had a stillborn child before John when we lived in France. And so we met with some counselors individually as a family and all that. And that was very helpful. We ended up moving back to the States after John got diagnosed with autism from France unexpectedly. And so our family went through all sorts of unexpected stuff, kids changing schools and finding what disability was, and changing kind of careers and all that. So it was very stressful. In addition to just the diagnosis, we had some counseling as a family individually as well. It was okay. It wasn't fantastic what we got then. Currently, I'm working on some stuff now, and we'll get some counseling. I'm also looking at spiritual directors and things like that to get some help. I did recently the Enneagram test. I don't know if any of you have done that. There's like 8 different types there. And I found out I'm more of a performer basically. And that kind of drives a lot of how I do stuff, including sometimes neglecting the family for succeeding in my career, stuff like that. So there's a lot trying to work through now that, and, but yeah, I mean, John, he's part of that, but there's more than just him involved in all that. But I believe strongly in counseling, good counseling, and we get advice for all sorts of stuff, banking, finances, stuff like that. So I think it's helpful when we're stuck to try to find a good person who can help. Sometimes it doesn't have to be a professional. Sometimes it's just a good friend who can help us talk through stuff, or sometimes, a spiritual director or someone with letters behind their name. But, we're moving in that direction. My 2 older kids have been in counseling, just kind of, that's their private time to talk to someone and vent, and we don't basically hear what they vent about. But I think it's been good for them to have a sounding board to talk about what's going on with them. So that's been helpful for them.
Al, thanks for sharing. So the last round call questions is, are there any other resources that come to mind that either you've benefited from or that you're aware of that you can suggest to those that might be watching this YouTube? And if there's anything else you want to share beyond. So Skip, back to you.
Yes, and in terms of resources, other than, I would, so Camp Paradise, it would be a thing. They've got a website. Maybe David, I'll share that with you. That would be a resource in terms of being able to spend some quality time one-on-one with your, I was going to say typical kids, but it could also be a opportunity with certain types of kids with disabilities. It's pretty physically demanding, but you know, there could be opportunities there as well. You know, I would say we kind of felt that there was a significant gap in terms of resources for us with regard to dealing with the diagnosis of Down syndrome. We found out that Jessica, our first, was born with Down syndrome in the delivery room. So it was something where, you know, you're expecting a very different kind of celebration and a experience, and you I'm almost embarrassed to admit this. I didn't even know what Down syndrome was when, you know, the day Jessica was born. So, you know, that was a very steep learning curve, and it was almost shocking, you know, in terms of the lack of encouragement that the medical community provided. It was almost as if, you know, the physicians, you know, tended to see only the negative aspects of it. And there was really no one there to voice or to, you know, kind of be a positive light in that. And so, you know, one of the things that we wound up doing is with a group of other families in our areas, we started an organization called Gigi's Playhouse, which is kind of a resource for, you know, families of kids with Down syndrome, and that has grown significantly. I'm no longer on the board or involved in a leadership role, but organization's doing some great things and has grown nationally and even internationally. So, you know, I would share Gigi's Playhouse as a resource for anybody that is going to be or soon going to be or has recently had a kid with Down syndrome. Especially, I think there's phenomenal resources there. And it's, you know, oftentimes it falls on the mothers to kind of ferret out, you know, kind of where the resources are. But I would just encourage the dads out there to engage and to be actively involved in that as well.
Skip, thanks for sharing. Jerry, back to you.
I don't know. I think what would help me out the most is I just looked from within to myself. I didn't really go for resources. What I know is just how I am as a person, I guess. I started picking up journaling, so I started writing things, and that was significant to be able to write your thoughts. It doesn't matter if it makes sense or not, but just getting on paper. And then you know, at first I wouldn't talk much about Jack. A lot of our close friends knew we were going through a struggle, and it was very difficult and so forth. And then a lot of people thought we were crazy when we had 2 more children, but it is what it is. I started, and Jack was born at a pound, and he had a bunch of issues. So he had these PVLs in his brain neurologically. So he was diagnosed as a spastic quadriplegic, and he didn't talk, and, you know, very stiff and so forth. So I decided just when he was 3 years old, I started running with him to get him out. And I ended up running a lot of marathons, never ran more than 5 miles before, because he enjoyed it so much. But then I said, I'm taking him out. So I would take him to church every Sunday at 7 a.m. And that was the biggest eye opener, but it didn't hit me until 2 years into it. And it hit me one day when I'm in church, and I would go at 7 a.m. because there's no music. You go in, you get the message, you go out, right? And so in Annapolis, there's this church, St. Mary's Catholic church. I'd go into the first pew or the third pew on the left-hand side because it's old-fashioned columns. And I didn't think people would notice me and see me. And I learned one of the most valuable lessons, but also made me feel great, is I was sitting there, and there was this older couple that would come in. This one gentleman would come in, and he looked like he was mad all the time. Okay. And he kept looking back. And I'm starting to get extremely upset. I'm thinking that he is going to say, like, why are you bringing your son here? Because very obvious, you know, he had issues. And he kept looking back, and I'm just getting irritated. Long story short, mass ends. I go to leave. He grabs my elbow. And I'm about to drop the F-bomb in church, right? Trying to say an act of contrition, which is a bunch of colorful words inside of it. And I look at him and we lock eyes, and he had tears in his eyes. And all he wanted to do is tell me how much it meant to him to see my son every Sunday. And he would come to 7 a.m. Mass with his wife. And the lesson that it taught me is that we all judge people. And when we tell our kids they shouldn't judge, I was judging right there. And it made me realize that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to, you know, talk about things I wouldn't talk about before. And it really it took a weight off my shoulders, because before that, I was a judge. I think I was too judgmental. And who am I to judge anybody to begin with, right? We all know that. But when you get a lesson like that right in front of you, I was about to just yell at a human being because I thought he was a bad person in church, by the way. Okay, that makes it worse. It shows you what kind of a person I am then, right? And then I look at him, and within a nanosecond, I almost broke down, wanted to hug him, crying, you know, for what he said. So I think the biggest resource to me was looking within and recognizing everything, and everything just hit me at once. Journaling really helped me out. And to this day, I consistently write him notes, keeping him updated. My father passed away on a Friday, and my son passed away on a Sunday. My dad passed away, he had a fall. I was by his bedside, and then my son passed away with me holding him 24 hours later, or 48 hours later. I write them all the time. So journaling is one of the biggest things for me, an escape. It's healing. So I don't know if that helps, but that's what worked for me.
Jerry, thanks for sharing. That's a very poignant story. I think we've all been there, where, you know, you think you've got an understanding of what the situation is, and it could not be more opposite, right? So it's a great lesson. Thanks for sharing. And that idea about journaling, I've been doing it for about 10 years since I went through the RCIA program. And I think it really does help in so many different ways, right? Just to get some things off your mind. And just, what are you grateful for? What are we thankful for in our lives? So thanks again for sharing. Al, back to you.
I know of some organizations that do activities for kids with disabilities, but also for siblings. There's a group called Nathaniel's Hope, based in Florida. They do something called Buddy Break, and they have, it's like a 3-hour respite program for parents, basically. So parents don't really talk to their kids during that time. Parents actually get a break and go out to eat or even sleep sometimes, but they have buddies for typical kids too. And my kids are typical siblings that are younger that really appreciate having the same buddy they have all the time and being spoiled by an adult or a teenager, while their sibling with a disability is also being treated well. There's a group called Sib Shops, I understand, that are, I think, for siblings as well. We've never done that, but I've heard good things about that. And I mentioned Johnny and Friends Camp. My 17-year-old volunteered. She went as a camper 3 years, and then I knew it was making a good thing for being good for her, because she volunteered to go as a worker the last year we went as a volunteer buddy for another family that had a disability. So she kind of moved out of the typical sibling role with our family to help another family. So I was glad to see her wanting to help someone else in the way that she's been helped. She was a buddy to a typical sibling as well. So, you know, she's still thinking it through and all that, but I think that week was really helpful for her. So yeah, I'm with a lot of my work is with families with disabilities. It's kind of become my work since entering last 6 years. So I'm with a lot of families with disabilities, and yeah, I think a lot about typical siblings because of mine, and trying to help them however we can do that. And even something called Night to Shine that just happened this past weekend. That's something throughout the U.S., around the world too. And there's the parents and there's typical siblings that volunteer for that too. So there's some good stuff happening for families, and it's good to take advantage of that when we can.
Al, thanks for sharing. Nathaniel's Hope, Johnny and Friends, we have dads that are involved with both those organizations as well. So we'll be sure to include that with the notes.
Night to Shine.
Yep. Tim Tebow Foundation, oh, absolutely. So I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for the dads.
David, can I add one more thing?
Absolutely.
Right. We have not been at the point where our kids are old enough to experience this as a resource for our family. But we are anticipating this. So my wife has started a program at Judson University in Elgin called RISE. Stands for Road to Independence, Road to Independence, Spiritual Formation, and Employment. And it's really an opportunity for kind of the next level of independence. Both my wife and I had great college experiences and being kind of away from home, living in a dormitory. And that's really what this is designed to be for kids with intellectual disabilities, ages 18 to 24 or so. So we're anticipating being able to take advantage of it, but just wanted to kind of point it out as another resource for those that have kids in that age category.
Thanks for sharing. We'll definitely be sure to include that. And I just want to say thank you again for those that have shared their personal stories and some of the resources that were included in tonight's program. So the 21st Century Dads Foundation is the organization, and our program is the Special Fathers Network, a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. We put on these bi-weekly Zoom calls. We interview dads. The interviews come out on a weekly basis. They're known as the Special Fathers Network Dad-to-Dad podcast, which are available on Apple and all the other popular podcast platforms. So for more information about each of the dads that were involved in tonight's program, you can scroll and find their stories and go a little bit more in depth. Please be sure to tune in to other ones of our bi-weekly Zoom calls, which are also posted at the YouTube channel for the 21st Century Dads Foundation.